She's the author of the book, America is Infected,
Now,
Illness.
absolutely, it's been a nightmare. Thankfully, we're coming to a close. And it started back in 2010 when my son got a strep infection. He came down with serious psychiatric symptoms, auditory hallucinations. He felt like bugs were crawling on him. He had acute OCD. He was in the corner. He was terrified. Something was wrong. We continued to call the pediatrician. No, we don't, that wouldn't happen. What's happening? I'm watching it happen. And so I Googled it real quick, and I found that it was an autoimmune disease of the brain. Should have had a lawyer with me that day.
Yeah.
Ultimately, though, he was admitted, and they did MRIs and did some various testing, and they did find one major infection. We went to 30 therapy sessions, but it was always confusing to me is how would a psychiatric medication treat a streptococcal
like a viral
pyogenes.
pathogen,
Yeah, it's like, what? So anyway, go with it, do what they say, right? We have to do what they say.
Right.
Everything that they say. And so we're being compliant, we're going every week. A year later, this thing happens again, but this time it's in his gut, and it's just like he's writhing in pain. I'm like, okay, therapy is not the right treatment for this. So I call the therapist, I'm like, come to the house, you've got to see this. Even the therapist said, he needs to go back to the doctor for more medical rule-outs. I'm like, I agree. Go back to the doctor. I mean, it's like ring around the rosy. Where do you go? They don't know where to send you, or they don't do the right follow-up when they do send you. Nobody has the records. When I finally got to the conclusion, I did understand why, but when I was going through it at the time, it was extremely frustrating, and it was heart-wrenching to watch him go through this. The same time, I was experiencing some symptoms myself, and they were tingling of the hands and feet. I was losing weight, grinding my teeth. I kept thinking it was the stress, the financial stress, losing my hair. It was just, I had a finger break that just wouldn't heal. I had to have 2 surgeries. It's like, what is wrong with me? But of course, there was the recession and the financial strain and all the things that we hear cause all these physical symptoms, but still doesn't make much sense. So I end up on some psych meds myself for the anxiety and the sleep abnormality, and I end up getting nerve blocks because I get diagnosed with RSD. So we've got these 2 major mysterious illnesses going on in our home at the same time. I kind of tabled mine because his completely took the forefront in 2013 when he contracted a second strep infection. Theoretically, you would want to put a child with this diagnosis called PANDAS on amoxicillin to prevent future strep pyogenes infections, similar to rheumatic fever. But our pediatrician didn't agree, and so he contracted a second one, which put him over the charts. And it was so sad to watch. But all the pressure from everyone around me, the schools, everyone else involved, you've got to be stricter, you've got to implement boundaries, it's your parenting, there's structure, there was a divorce, it's your fault. So at that point in time, I was like, you know what, this is not going to be my fault. So I bought that James Lehman Total Transformation Flip Your Kids Around program, had my web guide make these 2-ply tickets. We had a reward system, marbles, debit cards, took them on trips, reading night. Anyway, it's still up and down the behaviors. I was like, okay, we can rule out the parenting issue.
Right.
And so it was just at that point in time, I didn't know what else to do. And he had ODD, oppositional defiance disorder, OCD, ADHD, rage. I was like, how is this possible with an infection? Mm-hmm. Unless infection is the cause of these things.
Right.
And so then it began to dawn on me why this might be so controversial. They gave us a laundry list of rules that we had to comply with, or I would go to jail. They threatened me with going to jail multiple times, and we had to not let him do electronics. He couldn't hang out with friends. He lost his whole summer, all because he has this crazy, mysterious autoimmune disease of the brain that nobody knew what to do with. I can say this, but I will. During discovery, we found all types of secret emails back and forth between court officers, like little hateful comments. There was so many number of times they could have stepped in and helped us, like at least 100.
Wow.
But this went on and on. They kept on putting him back in the detention center, back in the detention center.
They don't care.
What are you going to do with him that I haven't been doing with him?
Right.
We did the psych meds. You told us to do the psych meds. We tried the psych meds. They don't work. You know, when you have a flare, it's up and down. It depends on if you're exposed to an infection. A psychiatrist is not going to be able to pull someone on and off a psych med when they're exposed to an infection. So that's not the answer.
Right.
So ultimately, I was terrified that they were just going to keep putting him back in the detention center. They ultimately tried to take custody away from me. They took away my medical decision making. And those 3 months we spent just fighting for custody of him. That's when I found an amazing lawyer. And thank God for her, because she was able to help me in that department. And then I was able to get him back. And when he came back, the IVIG, apparently he needed more than just the one treatment. But the guardian ad litem interfered with the medical care with the insurance company, so we couldn't get that. So I had to figure out what autoimmune diseases were, because I was like, okay, nothing's working. And so I just started researching, and I started digging in deep. And probably several months of just reading. Nothing makes sense. Immune systems just don't break on their own. How did we just all of a sudden wake up one day and everyone's immune system is malfunctioning?
Right.
There has to be something going on. And I didn't know what it was. So I went back to work at the spa, and I just started asking clients. My clients are healthy clients. They're not obese, they're not sedentary, they work out all the time, they eat at Whole Foods, they do everything we're told to do. And they were chronically ill, fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, kids with OCD, ADHD, families. And I started recognizing patterns. And so I just really felt like after being there for a while and watching this thing, whatever was happening was contagious. It was my son and myself that seemed to be the most symptomatic, but I did notice some symptoms in 2 children that we had adopted. And that's when I just realized there was something contagious, something was spreading. It was, I didn't know what it was. And my son had been tested for literally everything under the sun. So I did have extensive lab work to look at. Even though I didn't really know what I was looking at, I did Google every single word. And I did notice that, or I was told he had an active mycoplasma infection. So I launch into mycoplasma. And I'm like, what's mycoplasma?
Yeah,
it's supposed to be walking pneumonia. That's what it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be this relatively benign bacteria. The interesting thing is it's a very small genome. I think it's like 464 genes. It's the smallest. And when I figured out that there was nobody doing mycoplasma research in America other than Dr. Nicholson, I really didn't have many other options when I delved into the research. And what I found and learned rang so true with what had happened in our family. I cried for 3 days. I learned that in the Texas prison systems back in the early 1980s, they were testing with bioweapons, basically.
Wow.
There is a patent for this organism, and it is pathogenic mycoplasma, filed by the United States Army Pathology head researcher in 1993. And not only is it this bacteria, but it's been genetically modified to be more heat resistant, more immunosuppressive, and more virulent, also resistant to antibiotics. And the worst thing is they have woven some of the genes of some retroviruses into the DNA of the mycoplasma bacteria. So it is like a Russian doll.
Wow.
I have enough education to have been literally terrified when I realized we were infected with a bioweapon. Cried for 3 days, and I thought, oh my God, please, you know, there's nobody that's going to be able to help us. And so I just kept looking and reading, and I did find a treatment protocol. It explained everything. Dr. Nicholson explained everything about this organism, why when my son went on antibiotics and then he came off, he got worse again, why airplanes made us worse, why chemicals in our food make us worse. All these things, there's a reason for that. It's because we are infected with this intracellular organism that has been genetically modified, and most of us don't even know what's wrong with us. And nobody's going to be able to help us unless we empower ourselves and we know how to tell them how to help us.
I'm just going to read something out of the Journal of Degenerative Diseases. This is Dr. Nicholson talking about it, where he says, in the case of prisoners as experimental subjects, Texas has a long history of using prisoners for clinical trials. According to the minutes of the Texas Department of Corrections Board, selected prisons in East Texas were used for experiments that were conducted using various mycoplasma species to determine pathogenicity and countermeasures against infection. This likely resulted in the spread of mycoplasmal illnesses from prisoners to guards and other prison employees, and then their immediate family members in the community. Have a family member in the prison system?
We had a family member, right, that was down here in the Texas prison systems about that time. And I was able to look at the medical records and figure out exactly when we were infected. You can either get, it was 2002 when it happened, we were directly invaded. You can either be directly invaded with this organism, in which case you get really sick. Like with a flu that you just can't get better from. It's like 7 to 9 days, 9 to 12 days. I mean, I remember we were deathly sick. Or you can contract it slowly over time with 24 casual exposures. So say you work with someone. And I'm just going to say, ADHD was huge. Night terrors, separation anxiety, sinus infections, headaches, nightmares. And then it progressed to
but we never
joint pain. Put it together because they're so scattered that you just, one thing pops up, you go get that looked at, it's taken care of, but it's the same organism.
This is an explosion of all of these acronym type diseases people are dealing with throughout. I mean, this is, wow. And then so you really get into the nitty gritty. I mean, I've got the patent right here for pathogenic mycoplasma, filed June 6, 1991, after, of course, they do a series of clinical trials to see, countermeasures, things like that. You can always find these patents. Now, you really get into this in your book, America is Infected.
You cannot find it by blood. You have to find it by polymerase chain reaction testing. At that point in time, for whatever reason, they did not listen. But just like you said, there is an explosion. Everyone knows there is something. They just don't know what it is.
Speak out, because who knows what else is out there. I mean, this is one patent that we're dealing with in one small Texas prison. It's just what's out there is crazy to me.
Nicholas Christakis is a very accomplished scientist. He's both a sociologist who studies sociometrics, how things move in groups, and he's also a physician. And Erica Christakis, I think she was a developmental psychologist. She had some sort of teaching position. And as is true of many universities in North America, the administration puts out a flyer asking people to not wear any costumes that might be cultural appropriation of somebody. Pretty much there's no suit that you could wear. And so Erica Christakis wrote a unbelievably tame, gentle, carefully worded, tepid letter stating, maybe it's not right for universities to be imposing or interfering. These are adults. Yale students are adults, ultimately. They're at Yale. Maybe it's not really within the purview of the university to be doing this. Some social justice activists got very, very upset. And her husband, who's also the master of one of the colleges, came to her defense. Now I'm going to show it.
The exception is because other people have rights too, not just you.
Walk away. Walk away. Interrupt me. He doesn't deserve to be listened to.
An unsafe space here for all. Be
deny-
quiet. For all students. You understand that? As your position as master, it is your job to create a place of comfort and home for the students that live in Silliman. You have not done that. By sending out that email, that goes against your position as master. Do you understand that? Then
No, I don't agree with that.
Then why the fuck did you accept the position?
Because
Who
I have
the
a
fuck hired you?
I have a different
You
vision
should
than you.
step down. If that is what you think about being a master, you should step down. It is not about creating an intellectual space. It is not. Do you understand that? It's about creating a home here. You are not doing that.
You're supposed to be our advocate.
You get the general idea. So she's in his face, she's hostile, she's swearing at him. He's incredibly restrained and unbelievably polite.
Say, ADHD was huge. Night terrors, separation anxiety, sinus infections, headaches, nightmares. And then it progressed to joint pain.
She argued that Yale is not about creating intellectual environments. It's about creating safe spaces. Okay?